Ethan and Rachel set off toward the coordinates, their ships flying side by side through the endless expanse of the veil. The journey was quiet at first, broken only by the occasional crackle of static from their comms as they checked in with each other. Ethan kept glancing at his scanner, watching for any signs of trouble. The veil wasn't just a graveyard of old technology. It was also a hunting ground for scavengers, pirates, and anyone else willing to take risks for a profit. He had no illusions about how dangerous this trip could be. Rachel, on the other hand, seemed almost oblivious to the danger. Her focus was entirely on the construct's signal, which she had been analyzing nonstop since leaving the asteroid. She sat hunched over her console, her fingers flying across the controls as she tried to decode more of the message. Occasionally, she would pause to share her findings with Ethan over the comms. "It's not just a call for activation," she said at one point, her voice tinged with excitement. "There are fragments of instructions embedded in the signal. It's like whoever built this thing left a manual behind." "A manual?" Ethan replied, his tone skeptical. "For what?" "For rebuilding it," Rachel answered. "This construct it's damaged, but it wasn't abandoned completely. Whoever made it expected someone to come back someday and fix it." Ethan frowned. The idea that someone or something had planned for this moment centuries ago was unsettling. Why would anyone leave such a powerful machine out here, waiting in the darkness? And why now? What made today different from all the other days when the construct had lain dormant? As they traveled deeper into the veil, the signal grew stronger, guiding them toward their destination. Along the way, they passed remnants of old human settlements, crumbling stations, derelict ships, and skeletal frameworks of structures that had once housed thousands of people. These places were eerie, frozen in time like snapshots of a forgotten era. Rachel insisted on stopping at one of them, a partially intact outpost that looked promising for supplies. The outpost was cold and lifeless, its corridors coated in layers of dust. The air inside was stale, and the faint hum of failing systems echoed through the halls. Rachel moved quickly, scanning walls and consoles for any useful data. Ethan stayed close, keeping an eye out for hazards. The last thing they needed was to trigger some ancient security system or stumble into a nest of maintenance drones gone rogue. In one of the control rooms, Rachel found something interesting. Logs. They weren't complete. Most of the entries were corrupted, but enough remained to paint a picture of what had happened here. This outpost had been part of a larger network designed to monitor the veil. Back then, humanity hadn't known exactly what lay hidden in the asteroid field, but they suspected there was something important buried within it, something worth protecting or perhaps hiding. "They knew about the construct," Rachel said, scrolling through the fragmented text. "They called it Aegis." "Aegis," Ethan repeated. "What kind of name is that?" "It's Greek," Rachel explained. "It means shield or protector, according to these logs. Aegis was created to safeguard humanity's colonies during the Great War, but after the war ended, it disappeared. No one knows why." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. If Aegis really was a protector, then why had it vanished? And why had humanity forgotten about it? The more he learned, the less sense it all made. He glanced at Rachel, who was still engrossed in the logs, her expression growing darker with each passing moment. "There's something else," she said quietly. "These logs mention fear." Toward the end, the people stationed here were afraid of Aegis. They thought it might turn on them. "Turn on them," Ethan echoed. "You mean like a rebellion?" "I don't know," Rachel admitted. "But whatever happened, it must have been bad." The logs stop abruptly, right after mentioning a decision to deactivate Aegis. After that, nothing. Ethan didn't say anything. The implications were clear enough. Humanity had turned against its own creation, abandoning it to the void. Now, centuries later, they were trying to wake it up again. Was that wise? Or were they making the same mistake twice? They left the outpost shortly afterward, continuing their journey toward the coordinates. As they flew, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The sensation was subtle, a flicker of movement in the corner of his vision, a shadow drifting past his ship, but every time he turned to look, there was nothing there. Still, he kept his weapons powered up, just in case. Hours passed, and the signal led them to another massive asteroid. This one was even larger than the last, its surface scarred with deep fissures and jagged peaks. Following the readings, they landed near a wide crevice that sliced through the rock like a wound. Inside, they found what appeared to be an entrance, a heavy metal door, partially obscured by debris. It was sealed shut, but Rachel managed to pry it open using tools from her ship. Beyond the door lay a cavernous chamber, illuminated by faint blue light emanating from panels embedded in the walls. The air inside was cool and dry, carrying the faint scent of ozone. At the center of the room stood another construct, identical to the one they'd found earlier, but in slightly better condition. Its lights pulsed rhythmically, syncing with the signal that had brought them here. "This is it," Rachel whispered, her voice filled with awe. "This is where Aegis was meant to be reactivated." Ethan stepped closer, examining the construct. Unlike the first one, this unit seemed more intact, though parts of it were still missing. There were slots along its arms and torso, empty spaces where components should have been. Rachel pointed them out, explaining that these were likely ports for additional modules, pieces of Aegis scattered throughout the Veil. "We need to find those pieces," she said firmly. "If we can gather them all, we might be able to restore Aegis fully." "And if we can't?" Ethan asked. Rachel hesitated. "Then we'll have to decide whether to leave it alone or destroy it." The weight of her words hung in the air. Between them, destroying Aegis would mean erasing a piece of humanity's history, possibly forever. But leaving it incomplete carried its own risks. Who knew what might happen if someone else stumbled upon it and tried to reactivate it without understanding the consequences? Before they could discuss it further, a loud rumble shook the chamber. Dust rained down from the ceiling as the ground trembled beneath their feet. Ethan grabbed Rachel's arm, pulling her back toward the entrance. Whatever was causing the disturbance, it wasn't natural. Outside, the source of the commotion became clear. 3 ships had emerged from the shadows, their hulls painted matte black to blend with the darkness of space. They bore the insignia of Black Talon, a notorious mercenary group known for its ruthlessness and greed. Marcus Kane, the leader of Black Talon, had heard rumors of Aegis's existence and sent his forces to retrieve it before anyone else could. Ethan cursed under his breath. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Even if they managed to escape, there was no guarantee they could outrun Black Talon's ships. Rachel, however, refused to panic. Instead, she activated her comms, broadcasting a distress signal to nearby sectors. Anyone had to hear them. "Do you really think help will come?" Ethan asked, his voice tight with tension. "It's our best shot," Rachel replied. "We can't fight them alone." As the Black Talon ships closed in, Ethan noticed something strange. The construct inside the chamber had begun to stir, its lights flashing erratically. It wasn't fully operational, but it was responding to the threat. Slowly, it raised one arm, pointing toward the intruders. A low hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. "What's it doing?" Ethan shouted, backing away. Instinctively, "I don't know," Rachel yelled back. "But I don't think we want to stick around to find out." Just as the first shots rang out from the enemy ships, the construct unleashed a burst of energy. The blast tore through the darkness, striking one of the Black Talon vessels and sending it spiraling out of control. The other 2 ships immediately retaliated, firing salvos of missiles and laser beams at the construct. But Aegis didn't falter. It absorbed the attacks with ease, its defenses far superior to anything Ethan had ever seen. Despite its power, Aegis was still incomplete. Its movements were sluggish, and its responses lacked precision. One of the Black Talon ships took advantage of this, launching a boarding party onto the asteroid. Armed mercenaries poured out of their transport pods, advancing toward the chamber, with weapons drawn. Ethan and Rachel retreated deeper into the cavern, using the narrow passages to evade capture. Behind them, the sounds of battle echoed through the tunnel's explosions, shouts, and the relentless hum of Aegis energy discharges. They didn't dare look back. Their only goal now was survival. As they ran, Ethan realized something important. Aegis wasn't just fighting to protect itself, it was buying them time. Whether it understood their intentions or simply acted on instinct, it was giving them a chance to escape. And maybe, just maybe, that meant there was hope for humanity yet. But as they reached the edge of the asteroid and prepared to launch their ships, Ethan couldn't help but wonder, if Aegis truly was humanity's lost guardian, then who or what was it guarding them from? In a distant corner of the galaxy, far from the bustling trade routes and glowing cities of humanity's once great empire, there was silence. The stars here burned dimly, their light swallowed by vast clouds of dust and debris. This region, known as the Veil, was a graveyard of forgotten dreams. It was a place where ships rarely ventured, save for scavengers, desperate enough to risk their lives for scraps of metal or fragments of ancient technology. Among these scavengers was Ethan Cole, a man whose face bore the lines of too many sleepless nights and too much hardship. Ethan wasn't always like this. Once, he had been part of something bigger, pilot in the Human Federation fleet, flying sleek starships through the void. But that life was gone now, lost in the chaos of a war that had torn humanity apart. When the fighting ended, what remained of the Empire fractured into factions, each vying for power. The Federation itself became little more than a shadow of its former self, struggling to hold on to its crumbling territories. Ethan left it all behind, trading his uniform for a patched-up mining vessel and a lonely existence among the asteroids. On this particular day, Ethan's ship drifted lazily through the Veil. His sensors pinged softly as they scanned the surrounding area, searching for anything valuable. Most days, the readings came back empty, showing nothing but rocks and endless space. But today, something caught his attention. A faint energy signature pulsed weakly from deep within the asteroid field. It wasn't strong enough to be a working ship or station. It was something else, something buried beneath layers of rock and time. Curiosity tugged at him. Energy signatures out here were rare, and most of them turned out to be useless junk left over from the war. Still, every now and then, you found something worth selling, maybe an old weapon system, a piece of tech that could fetch a decent price on the black market. Ethan adjusted his course, guiding his ship toward the source of the signal. As he drew closer, the jagged edges of a massive asteroid loomed into view. Its surface was scarred with craters, pockmarked by centuries of collisions with smaller rocks. He activated the ship's grappling arms, anchoring himself to the asteroid before stepping outside in his suit. The airlock hissed open, and Ethan stepped onto the rocky terrain. His boots crunched against the uneven surface as he moved, guided by the blinking indicator on his wrist console. The energy signature grew stronger with each step, leading him to a dark crevice hidden between two towering boulders. Peering inside, Ethan saw something that made his breath catch in his throat. There, half buried in the rubble, was a construct, unlike anything he'd ever seen. Its shape was vaguely humanoid, though much larger than any person. Its body was encased in smooth, metallic plating, etched with intricate patterns that glowed faintly in the darkness. Parts of it were damaged, exposed wires dangling like veins, but even in its ruined state, it radiated an aura of power and mystery. Ethan reached out cautiously, brushing away some of the dust covering its chest. Beneath his gloved fingers, he felt warmth and impossible detail given how long this thing must have been here. "What are you?" Ethan muttered under his breath, his voice muffled by the helmet. He circled the construct, inspecting it from every angle. There were no markings, no insignia to identify its origin. Whoever or whatever had built this thing, they hadn't wanted it found easily. Yet here it was, waiting silently in the depths of the veil. As Ethan examined the construct, his scanner picked up another anomaly. This time, it wasn't just an energy reading, it was a signal, faint but deliberate, emanating from somewhere inside the machine. Without thinking, he pressed his hand against a panel near its shoulder. The moment his palm made contact, the construct shuddered slightly, and a soft hum filled the air. Lights flickered along its frame, growing brighter with each passing second. Ethan stumbled back, startled, as the construct began to stir. For a brief moment, he thought it might come alive completely, standing up and speaking to him. But instead, the movement stopped abruptly, leaving the construct frozen in place once more. The signal, however, continued to pulse, stronger now, almost like a heartbeat. Ethan's mind raced. Whatever this thing was, it clearly wasn't dead entirely. It was dormant, waiting for something, or someone. Back aboard his ship, Ethan replayed the data his scanner had collected. The signal was complex, layered with codes and frequencies he didn't recognize. He tried broadcasting it back toward the construct, hoping to trigger another reaction, but nothing happened. Frustrated yet intrigued, he decided to take a closer look at the information. That's when he noticed something unusual. Embedded within the signal was a pattern, repeating over and over again. It looked like coordinates. Ethan frowned, leaning back in his chair. Coordinates meant location, and locations usually led to answers. If he followed them, maybe he'd find out more about this strange discovery. But following unknown signals into uncharted territory wasn't exactly safe, especially not out here in the Vale. Still, curiosity gnawed at him. This wasn't just some random hunk of scrap metal. It was important. He could feel it in his gut. Before making a decision, Ethan transmitted the data to Elysium, the nearest human outpost. Elysium was little more than a collection of floating habitats orbiting a dying star, home to miners, traders, and scientists trying to eke out a living on the fringes of civilization. One of those scientists, Rachel Monroe, picked up Ethan's transmission almost immediately. She was a researcher specializing in ancient technologies, and her interest was piqued the moment she saw the readings. Rachel contacted Ethan via comms, her voice sharp with urgency. "Where did you find this?" she asked, skipping pleasantries altogether. Ethan explained everything: the construct, the signal, the coordinates. Rachel listened intently, asking questions whenever he paused. By the time their conversation ended, she was convinced of one thing. Whatever Ethan had stumbled upon, it was significant, possibly even historic. "I'll meet you at your location," Rachel said firmly. "Don't touch anything else until I get there," Ethan agreed, though he couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Something about the construct unsettled him, as if it were watching him even in its dormant state. He spent the next few hours preparing for Rachel's arrival, double-checking his equipment and keeping an eye on the construct through the ship's cameras. Every so often, the faint glow of its lights would pulse slightly, reminding him that it was still active in some way. When Rachel finally arrived, she wasted no time getting to work. Her ship docked alongside Ethan's, and within minutes, she was suiting up to join him on the asteroid. Unlike Ethan, who carried himself with the weariness of someone who'd seen too much, Rachel exuded energy and determination. Her dark hair was tied back neatly, and her eyes sparkled with excitement as she approached the construct. "This is incredible," she whispered, crouching down to examine the patterns etched into its surface. "I've never seen anything like it." Together, they worked to decipher the signal. Rachel brought advanced tools from her ship, using them to analyze the construct's internal systems. Slowly but surely, they pieced together fragments of information. What they discovered sent chills down their spines. The signal wasn't just random noise, it was a message addressed to someone referred to only as the Keeper. And the coordinates? They pointed to another location deep within the veil. We need to follow them, Rachel said, her voice tinged with awe. This could change everything. Ethan hesitated. Following the coordinates meant venturing deeper into the veil, a place notorious for its dangers. Pirates, malfunctioning drones, and unstable asteroids were just a few of the threats they might encounter. But Rachel's enthusiasm was contagious, and a small part of him couldn't resist the allure of uncovering the truth. After all, he'd spent years drifting aimlessly through the stars. Maybe this was his chance to find purpose. Again. All right, Ethan said finally. Let's see where this takes us. As they prepared to leave, neither of them noticed a faint shimmer of light in the distance, a sign that they weren't alone in the veil. Somewhere out there, others had picked up the signal too, and unlike Ethan and Rachel, those others had no intention of letting humanity's lost guardian remain buried. Ethan and Rachel scrambled aboard their ships, the distant echoes of battle still ringing in their ears. The Constructagus was holding its own against Black Talon's forces, but it wouldn't last forever. Even in its damaged state, Egypt was powerful, but it was also slow and predictable. The mercenaries were learning its patterns, adapting to its attacks. Every blast of energy from Aegis was met with increasingly coordinated counterstrikes. Ethan knew they had to act fast if they wanted to survive. As their ships powered up, Ethan glanced at his scanner one last time. The faint blue glow of Aegis' energy signature flickered on the screen, pulsing like a heartbeat. It felt wrong to leave it behind, especially after everything it had done to protect them. But staying meant certain death. Black Talon wasn't just here for loot. They were hunting Aegis, and they wouldn't stop until they had it under their control. Ready? Rachel's voice crackled over the comms, pulling Ethan out of his thoughts. As ready as I'll ever be, he replied. Grimly, their engines roared to life, propelling the ships away from the asteroid. Behind them, the cavern shook violently as another explosion rocked the chamber where Aegis stood. Ethan clenched his jaw, forcing himself to focus on the task ahead. They needed distance enough to lose Black Talon, or, failing that, enough to call for reinforcements. But escaping wouldn't be easy. The two remaining Black Talon ships broke off from their assault on Aegis and turned their attention to Ethan and Rachel. Missiles streaked through space, narrowly missing Rachel's ship as she executed a sharp evasive maneuver. Ethan followed suit, weaving between chunks of debris and firing short bursts from his ship's limited weaponry. They're not letting us go, Rachel said tersely, her voice tight with strain. We need a plan. Ethan's mind raced. He couldn't outrun them, not in these patched-up vessels. And even if they could, Black Talon would hunt them down eventually. No, running wasn't an option. They needed leverage, something to make Black Talon think twice about pursuing them. The signal, Ethan said suddenly, his voice cutting through the tension. They must have picked it up too. That's how they found us. Rachel hesitated, then nodded. You're right. If we can disrupt it or fake it, we might buy ourselves some time. Without wasting another moment, Ethan patched into his ship's communication system. Using the fragments of data they'd gathered earlier, he began broadcasting a distorted version of the signal. The false transmission pulsed erratically, mimicking the original message, but leading nowhere. On their scanners, the Black Talon ships wavered, confused by the conflicting readings. It's working, Rachel said, relief evident in her tone. They're slowing down. For now, at least. They had gained some breathing room, but Ethan knew this reprieve wouldn't last long. Black Talon's pilots weren't amateurs. Sooner or later, they'd realize they'd been duped. Until then, Ethan and Rachel pushed their ships to their limits, putting as much distance between themselves and the mercenaries as possible. Hours passed in tense silence. Ethan kept glancing at his rearview monitors, half expecting to see the black shapes of enemy ships closing in. But the veil remained eerily quiet, its shadows hiding both danger and salvation. As they traveled, Rachel continued analyzing the data they'd collected so far. She pieced together more fragments of the signal, uncovering additional coordinates scattered throughout the asteroid field. "These aren't random locations," she said finally, breaking the silence. "They're part of a network, a map, of sorts. Each point corresponds to a piece of Aegis." Ethan frowned. "So you're saying there are more constructs out there?" "Not exactly," Rachel replied. "From what I can tell, Aegis is modular. Its components were separated and hidden across the veil to prevent anyone from reactivating it easily. We've only scratched the surface. The implications were staggering. If Aegis truly was modular, then restoring it would require finding all of its pieces and protecting them from those who sought to exploit its power. Marcus Kane and his mercenaries weren't the only ones interested in Aegis. Word of its existence had likely spread far beyond Black Talon, drawing the attention of other factions vying for control of the galaxy. Admiral Grace Hayes of the Human Federation was one such figure, unlike Kane, whose motives were driven purely by greed. Hayes saw Aegis as a potential weapon, one that could tip the balance of power in humanity's favor. Her fleet had already begun mobilizing toward the Veil, responding to reports of unusual activity in the region. Though her intentions might differ from Kane's, Ethan doubted she cared any more about Aegis' true purpose than the mercenaries did. Caught between these opposing forces, Ethan and Rachel found themselves in an impossible position. They were scavengers, not soldiers. Yet somehow, they had become key players in a conflict that spanned the stars. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on Ethan's shoulders. He hadn't asked for this to unearth humanity's lost guardian, to decide its fate, but here he was, standing at the crossroads of history. "We can't trust anyone," Ethan said finally, his voice low but resolute. "Not Kane, not Hayes, not even the Federation. If Aegis falls into the wrong hands..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Rachel understood perfectly. If Aegis was used as a weapon, it could devastate entire star systems. But if left alone, it might never fulfill its intended purpose, to protect humanity. "We'll have to play both sides," Rachel suggested cautiously. "Keep them guessing while we find the rest of Aegis." It was a risky strategy, but it was all they had. By feeding false information to both Black Talon and the Federation, they could buy themselves time to locate the remaining pieces of Aegis. Once they had them, they could decide what to do next, whether to restore Aegis fully, destroy it, or hide it away once more. But first, they needed allies. Neither Ethan nor Rachel could face the galaxy's most dangerous factions alone. As they plotted their next move, Rachel contacted a trusted colleague stationed at Elysium, the same outpost where she had initially received Ethan's transmission. Dr. Liam Carter, a soft-spoken engineer with a knack for solving problems, agreed to meet them discreetly. Together, the three of them devised a plan to gather resources and build makeshift defenses for their ships. In the days that followed, Ethan and Rachel scoured the Veil for supplies, venturing into abandoned stations and derelict ships. Each discovery brought new risks, from malfunctioning security systems to rival scavengers looking to claim the spoils for themselves. Through it all, they worked tirelessly, preparing for the inevitable confrontation with Black Talon and the Federation. Meanwhile, Aegis remained active on the asteroid where they had left it. Though damaged and incomplete, it continued to resist Black Talon's forces, its movements growing more fluid with each passing hour. Whether it was repairing itself or simply adapting to the situation, Ethan couldn't say. What he did know was that Aegis was no longer just a relic of the past. It was alive, aware, and waiting. One evening, as Ethan and Rachel rested aboard their ships, a sudden burst of static interrupted the quiet hum of their comms. At first they thought it was interference from the Veil's dense debris field, but then a voice emerged from the noisy calm. measured tone that sent shivers down their spines. "This unit identifies as Aegis," the voice said. "Primary directive, safeguard humanity. Secondary directive, await instruction from designated Keeper." Ethan exchanged a stunned glance with Rachel. Somehow, Aegis had managed to establish contact with them, reaching out across the void. It wasn't speaking directly to either of them. It seemed to be broadcasting a general message, searching for someone it recognized as its keeper. "What does it mean by keeper?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Rachel admitted. "But whatever it is, it's important. Aegis won't fully activate until it finds one." The revelation added yet another layer of complexity to their mission. Not only did they need to find the remaining pieces of Aegis, but they also had to determine whether they or someone else qualified as its keeper. Failure to do so could render all their efforts meaningless. As the night wore on, Ethan stared out at the endless expanse of stars, his mind racing with possibilities. Somewhere out there, humanity's future hung in the balance, and somewhere closer, Aegis waited patient, watchful, and ready to stir once more. Ethan and Rachel's journey through the veil deepened as they followed the map of coordinates embedded in Aegis' signal. Each location was a puzzle, hidden among the jagged rocks and endless debris of the asteroid field. The next set of coordinates led them to an old mining station suspended precariously between two massive asteroids. Its exterior was battered and scarred, its once gleaming metal eaten away by time and micrometeorites. To Ethan, it looked like a ghost, something that had died long ago, but refused to fade completely. The station's docking bay yawned open, its doors hanging askew as if torn apart by some violent event. Inside, the air was thin and stale, carrying the metallic temps of rust and decay. Rachel stepped cautiously onto the platform, her boots crunching against the layer of dust that coated every surface. Ethan stayed close behind, his hand resting on the grip of his sidearm. Neither of them trusted this place. It felt too quiet, too empty. Abandoned stations like this often hid dangerous malfunctioning drones, booby traps left behind by scavengers. Or worse. "This has to be it," Rachel said, consulting her scanner. "The signal's coming from somewhere inside." Ethan nodded, though his eyes darted warily around the darkened corridors ahead. The station's power systems were dead, leaving only their helmet lights to pierce the gloom. As they moved deeper into the structure, they found remnants of its former purpose: rusted mining equipment, cracked control panels, and walls covered in faded safety warnings. But there was something else: two signs of recent activity. Scorch marks marred the floor in places, and several rooms showed evidence of forced entry. "Someone's been here," Ethan muttered, crouching to examine a set of fresh boot prints in the dust. They weren't theirs, nor did they belong to Black Talon's mercenaries. Whoever had come before them had left in a hurry, judging by the scattered tools and discarded supplies littering the area. Rachel frowned, scanning the room with her handheld device. If someone else is looking for Aegis pieces, we're not the only ones playing this game. The thought unsettled both of them. Up until now, they had assumed Black Talon and the Federation were their primary threats. But the discovery of these tracks suggested another faction, or, perhaps, multiple factions was also hunting Aegis. The stakes were higher than ever, and the clock was ticking. They pressed on, following the signal deeper into the station. Eventually, they reached what appeared to be a central chamber, its walls lined with reinforced steel, and its ceiling crisscrossed with exposed wiring. In the middle of the room stood a pedestal, its surface glowing faintly with the same blue light they had seen emanating from Aegis. On top of the pedestal rested a small, rectangular module encased in crystalline material. It hummed softly, resonating with the signal that had guided them here. "That's it," Rachel breathed, stepping forward. "One of Aegis' components." Ethan hung back, keeping watch as Rachel approached the pedestal. She examined the module carefully, running diagnostics with her scanner. "It's intact," she said after a moment. No damage. This must have been protected somehow, shielded from whatever destroyed the rest of the station. Before she could retrieve it, a low rumble echoed through the chamber. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and a section of the wall slid open with a grinding screech. Out stepped 3 figures clad in sleek black armor, their faces obscured by helmets equipped with visors. They carried weapons that looked far more advanced than anything Ethan or Rachel had ever seen. Well, one of the figures said, his voice distorted by a mutt. Looks like we're not the only ones interested in old tech. Ethan tensed, recognizing the insignia on their uniforms. It matched none of the known factions operating in the Vale. These were mercenaries, but not part of Black Talon. Their presence raised questions Ethan didn't have time to answer. All he knew was that they were outnumbered and outgunned. We don't want trouble, Rachel said firmly, raising her hands in a gesture of peace. We're just here to collect what belongs to us. The leader of the group chuckled, the sound, cold and humorless. Belongs to you. Funny, last I checked, no one owns ancient relics, especially ones worth a fortune. Ethan exchanged a glance with Rachel. There was no reasoning with these people. They were here for profit. Plain and simple. If they wanted the module, they'd take it by force. And if Ethan and Rachel resisted, without warning, the leader raised his weapon, aiming it squarely at Rachel. Hand it over, he demanded, or we'll take it and you with extreme prejudice. Ethan's mind raced. Fighting wasn't an option. Their suits offered little protection against the mercenaries' superior firepower. But surrendering the module would mean losing a crucial piece of Aegis and handing it over to people who clearly intended to sell it to the highest bidder. Then Rachel acted with a sudden burst of speed. She snatched the module from the pedestal and darted toward the exit. Her movements caught the mercenaries off guard, giving Ethan just enough time to draw his weapon and fire a shot into the ceiling. The explosion of noise and falling debris created chaos, buying them precious seconds to escape. Move, Ethan shouted, grabbing Rachel's arm as they sprinted down the corridor. Behind them, the mercenaries gave chase, their boots pounding against the metal floor. Shots rang out, ricocheting off the walls and narrowly missing their targets. The chase led them back toward the docking bay, where their ships awaited. But as they neared the exit, Ethan spotted a problem. The mercenaries had anticipated their escape route. 2 more figures emerged from the shadows, blocking their path to the ships. Trapped between 2 groups of enemies, Ethan and Rachel had nowhere left to run. Just when it seemed all hope was lost, a deafening roar filled the air. The entire station shook violently, throwing everyone off balance. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling as cracks spiderwebbed across the walls. Ethan steadied himself, staring in disbelief as the source of the disturbance revealed itself. Through the gaping hole in the docking bay's roof descended a familiar shape, a towering construct bathed in blue light. It was Aegis, hovering silently above the chaos. Its damaged form still bore the scars of its earlier battles, but its presence was undeniable. The mercenaries froze, their weapons trained on the machine but their confidence visibly shaken. Aegis raised one arm, pointing directly at the group blocking Ethan and Rachel's escape. Without hesitation, it unleashed a pulse of energy, sending the mercenaries sprawling backward. The others hesitated, unsure whether to fight or flee. Seizing the opportunity, Ethan grabbed Rachel's hand and bolted toward their ships. Get to your ship, he yelled over the commotion. I'll cover you. Rachel obeyed, sprinting toward her vessel while clutching the module tightly. Ethan fired a few shots to keep the remaining mercenaries at bay, then dove into his own cockpit. Both ships powered up simultaneously, their engines roaring to life as they prepared to launch. But Aegis wasn't done yet. As the mercenaries regrouped and attempted to pursue, the construct unleashed another wave of energy, disabling their vehicles and cutting off their escape routes. Ethan watched in awe as Aegis turned its attention to the station itself. targeting key structural points with precision strikes. The building began to collapse inward, sealing off access to the module's chamber. "They won't be able to get back in there anytime soon," Rachel said over the comms, her voice tinged with relief. "And neither will we," Ethan replied grimly. "But at least we've got the module." As their ships cleared the station's wreckage, Aegis lingered for a moment longer, its glowing eyes fixed on them. Then, without a word or signal, it turned and disappeared into the depths of the veil, vanishing as quickly as it had arrived. Back aboard their ships, Ethan and Rachel took stock of their situation. They had secured another piece of Aegis, but the cost had been high. The encounter with the unknown mercenaries proved that they weren't the only ones searching for the Guardian's fragments. Every step forward brought new dangers, new rivals, and new questions. "What happens if we can't find all the pieces?" Ethan asked finally, breaking the silence. "What if someone else gets there first?" Rachel hesitated, her expression thoughtful. "Then we fight, or we adapt. We can't let Aegis fall into the wrong hands, not when so much depends on it." Ethan nodded, though doubt lingered in his mind. He had never asked for this responsibility, never sought to become humanity's reluctant savior, yet here he was carrying the weight of countless lives on his shoulders. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with peril and sacrifice. But as long as Aegis stirred in the shadows, watching and waiting, Ethan knew one thing for sure: they couldn't turn back now.